All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 2 o'clock. We want to make sure that we are respectful of your time today and get you all this information for you to take back and kind of mull over with your group and your whatever teachers and teams you're working with. So we're planning on being and expanding inclusive practices as you're training today, you are in the right place. If not, let us know in the chat box and we'll try to help you figure out where you're actually supposed to be. Christy and I are your co-presenters today, and we are going to do just a couple quick housekeeping things, and then we will introduce ourselves, and then we will get started. So if you have any questions or thoughts, we want you to utilize the chat box. You are muted by on our end, just to make sure we avoid any sort of feedback on the microphone. So if you have questions or thoughts, put them in the chat box for us. Let us know that you're here. We are going to have some polls and an evaluation at the end today. So we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. You know, we have been on lots of webinars ourselves, and so we know that you're probably all webinared out at this point. But so we appreciate you being here with us today and hanging with us, and we hope that this information is going to be helpful for you, and we hope that you'll take away some things that you can start to implement either in your virtual setting or as you start to think ahead to next year. So I will go ahead and we'll start with introductions. My name is Sarah Larison, and I'm a consultant with the Indiana IEP Resource Center. And prior to that, I started out as a general education teacher. I taught 3rd grade and 6th grade for 4 years, and then switched to special education and worked with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders for several years before I spent some time at the department, and then I came here. So I have lots of different diverse experiences in education, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today to chat inclusive practices. And I will let my co-host introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Christy Wright. I'm a speech language pathologist. I've been with the center for almost 2 years now. I initially started out as an SLP in the hospital and then worked my way into the school system. Worked as a school-based SLP for 15 years before going to the Department of Education in the Office of Special Education as the early childhood specialist. But realizing that I wasn't doing exactly what I wanted to do, I moved over to the IEP Resource Center to be able to provide this information to you guys. I feel like especially with speech language pathologists, there's not a lot of support for us out there. So I am using this platform, I'm using my position to be able to include SLPs on a lot of the information. Hopefully I'm going to put in a plug here real quick, going rogue, Sarah, but I did start a Padlet for SLPs that provides resources. You just put in your name and information. There's going to be questions that people can pose. You can request information, but it's basically trying to take the place of the learning community that we used to have in Learning Connections. So please email me if you haven't heard of that yet and you want that information. I can definitely send that out to you. Sarah and I have decided to just keep this real, and we thought about doing a poll on who is addicted to TikTok yet, or possibly even doing a TikTok for you, but we decided not to. So if you are addicted to TikTok, it's okay, it's okay. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. Ask any questions that you may have in the chat, and one of us can get back with you or answer it during the presentation, but definitely address it. We are recording this. We can also get the copy of the chat that we will be able to send out to you in case somebody puts in an idea that you thought was great, but then you missed it. Instead of scrolling all the way through, we can get that to you also. So that's all.
Yeah, so really quickly with audio issues, if you are having audio issues, if you're using a Chromebook, we put a note at the bottom of the PowerPoint, but if you are using a Chromebook, you may have to switch your audio settings from computer audio to a call-in option. So there's, when you go to your audio options, you can switch and just use a phone number and call in, but you can still see the presentation on your on your screen. And I think Mark has put some things in the chat box that that will allow you to kind of troubleshoot if you're having any trouble seeing the presentation or hearing the presenters. So just a quick technology plug before we get started. So if you have any questions about technology, throw them in the chat box, and Mark can kind of help you troubleshoot there as well.
So we did decide to start out using our video just so you could put a face to our names and our voices and everything, but we're not staying on here. So anyway, I'm going to close off my webcam, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
All right. So the first thing that we'll go over today is our agenda. So again, we are going to do some polls to try to get some information about who's here, about the content, allowing you to respond to some of the things we're talking about. We're going to talk about least restrictive environment and what that means to you and your role, whether it be specifically in special education or related services, or whether it be general education and what you need to know about least restrictive environment and that aspect as well. Then we're going to watch a short video about kind of backward. It's called the backward bicycle, but it's kind of talking about how we have to change our thinking and how we have to kind of reprogram how we think about things and how we approach things when it comes to inclusive practices and inclusive education. And then we're going to talk about James Ryan's 5 essential questions for life, and we're going to tie those into some of the content and the examples that we're going to give you that hopefully you can leave with today, some practical things that you feel like maybe you can implement into your practices as you think ahead to the next year. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to do a poll, and what we want you to tell us is what your role is. And the purpose of this is just for us to get an idea of who all is on here, so that we can try to tailor some of the content and the examples and the things that we're doing to the roles and the people that are here. So we're going to go ahead and open this poll. You should see it. It should ask you what your primary role in your district is. If you'll just go ahead and complete that poll for us, we'll give you just a minute.
I'm seeing you paraprofessionals, so sorry you were not in that poll, but we've got you. And there's quite a few of you, so that's awesome. All right, I think, yeah, the poll's slowing down. So I'm going to go ahead and close that off. And share the results just so everyone can see. Please add, I don't know what the percentage is, but a percentage of paraprofessionals also. So that will be great. And that's kind of what we expected. Okay.
We've got a really great mix of roles and responsibilities here today. So we're going to try our best to, when we give examples, to tailor those things to all of the different roles that you all play and what all the different hats that you wear within those roles. So we'll try to make sure that we cover all of that for you today. And again, for those of you, I do see some people still hopping on and getting some things ironed out with audio and being able to see the presentation. So again, we want this to be as interactive as a webinar can be. So if you have things that you want to add or ask about in the chat box, Christy and I are trying to monitor that along with Mark, and he's helping out with any video or audio issues that you might be having. So put that stuff in the chat box, and we will try to brainstorm with you, and we want to make sure that we get your feedback on this as well as we go. So we are going to start out with talking about least restrictive environment and what that is and kind of what it means for you all and in your roles. So this is kind of the legalese of what LRE is. And again, I'm not going to read this to you. I know that I have full confidence that you can kind of read through this yourself, but I do want to point out a couple of things on this slide. When we're talking about least restrictive environment, we're talking about to the maximum extent appropriate. So have we exhausted all other efforts? Have we tapped into this continuum of support to make sure that we've really provided all of the services and supports to students within a general education setting before we decide to put them in a more restrictive setting? Because it's really important for our students to be to have access to their non-disabled peers. So this is the range of placement that I was talking about, or that continuum of support. So when you look at this, you see that on one end of the arrow is the general education classroom, and that's the least restrictive setting that a student can be in. So you're providing supports within that classroom. They're in that classroom with their peers 80% or more of their day, being exposed to grade level content and with their peers. And then as you can see as the continuum goes along, so some pull-out services are being received, and some students need that. So we have to be really cognizant and aware of what our students need, looking at data, knowing who they are, and kind of how they tick to be able to really know where these placements are appropriate for our students. So there are going to be some students that need some pull-out services, and they need something a little bit more intensive than the general education setting with push-in support. And then the next step to that continuum is lots of pull-out services. So we're talking about like a resource room where they're spending less than 40% of the time in the general education setting, and they're in that separate classroom, in that resource room, a lot more than they are in the general education classroom. And then the next one is separate, a completely separate school. So whether it be for there's different programs at different schools or different buildings, and so they may be separated from their home school. And then the next one would be residential. So students placed into a residential facility for there's a number of needs that could arise that may warrant residential placement. And then the most restrictive is that homebound or hospital placement, where we're talking about our students they're not getting access to their peers in that homebound setting at all, and they're only getting very minimal access to teachers and supports within an educational setting. So the reason we go over this is so that least restrictive environment kind of is the foundation for inclusive practices and what that continuum looks like. And again, going back to really knowing our students and what they need and where those services are going to be most appropriate for each student. So again, a least restrictive environment is decided on a case-by-case basis, and it's decided based upon student need. One of the really important differences here, or things to point out here, is it's based on student need and not based on availability of resources. And sometimes that's really hard to swallow, because we want to make sure that we are, if a student has a need, that we're figuring out a way to get it done and making sure that that continuum is there and available for all students. So this is just a little bit more in-depth continuum, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but I wanted you to have access to this so you could go back and use it as a reference, because this presentation is included in your materials today, so you will be able to have access to that at the end. So this is just a good little bit more in-depth graphic that shows some of the different steps that you may not have seen on that first continuum graphic that we just looked at. So one of the things that we really try to hit on when we're talking about inclusive practices is why we consider general education first. So the Article 7 is very clear in stating that all students should be considered for general education as a very first step. So we should never just skip over general education as a placement. We have to consider all students, general education students, first. and there's lots of data and that supports the statement that students do better when they're exposed to general education content, general education, you know, their teachers and their peers. So academically and socially, there's a lot of data that supports the inclusive practices. And not only do students with disabilities do better with general education exposure, but so do their general education peers. They are exposed to, you know, people who are different than them and learning the things that are special and unique about them and what make them special. So everybody kind of benefits from this inclusive environment. And then the last one that we always like to hit on here is that it prepares students for the real world. When we go out into the real world, there's not a special education and a general education Target or Walmart or you know, restaurants. So we're really trying to prepare them for a world that is trying to be more inclusive every day.
And I think as far as looking at it toward looking at speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, those types of things, we're used to, you know, those kids are in the classroom the majority of the time. Their LRE is a 50, which is the highest that you can have. But most of those students are taken out to receive those services. So what we really want to talk about today is, you know, even looking at the speech kids who are getting pulled out of your class 2 times a week, 3 times a week, you know, what can speech therapists do? What can related service providers do to be able to go into your classroom to help you as well as other students, but then also help the students staying in the classroom, but getting their services with other general education students also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at, this is just a graphic to kind of show the inclusive services continuum. So you see to all the way to the left that kind of represents each individual student being pulled out, not really being included into any of the general education population, but not really being included together as a group either. And then that second graphic shows, again, in the big circle, you see that general education setting, and then the little outside circle. So now we've got students who all have disabilities, but they're being grouped together within a pull-out setting. Then the next one would be that group of special education students being included in the classroom, but still being grouped together. So maybe when they're being, you know, when they're being pulled, or if they have paraprofessionals in there, or when related services come in, they're still all in a group, not really interacting or working with their general education peers. And then that fourth graphic is the one we're probably the most familiar with when we talk about inclusion, where all students are integrated into this this general education setting. But then this kind of Cadillac model here at the end, it represents every student has a uniqueness. So every student has a different color, and there's not, you know, green is not special or general education, and the different colors are special education. Everybody is unique. Everybody brings something special to the table, and that's really what we're aiming for. Is when we talk about inclusive practices, we're talking about how are we tapping into each child's uniqueness and the things that they bring to the table, but also going back to related services and SLPs. How do we ensure that we're bringing them in and we're tapping into their expertise so that all of our students can benefit from it, and not just our students who are labeled with a disability. So Christy, do you want to go ahead and talk about this poll?
Yep. So we created this poll. And what does your speech language and related services look like currently? So we have A being the exclusion, we have B being the integration, C being the inclusion, and D segregation. So I will go ahead and launch this poll. And if you could tell us how you feel your related services are now, and SLP.
Christy, you might want to repeat those options, because while the poll's up, I don't think they see the graphic.
Oh, okay. So the exclusion is just basically when the students are in another building. They're not even included in anything that you're doing.
And
The integration,
is that D?
that's A.
Oh, that's A. Okay.
B is integration, where you have the kids in there, but they're still in their separate group within the classroom. Inclusion is when the students are just all over the classroom and not separated. And then segregation is when they're pulled out. So this question is to see how your related service and your SLP, your speech services, are provided.
And if you can't see the poll or you're having trouble responding to it, or you're just on the phone, you feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll try to factor those into that response.
Yeah. Looking, we have about 70% that have voted. It looks like it's slowing down. I was getting, wait a little bit more. There's still some coming in. All right, you guys all ready? Oh. All right. Well, this is interesting. Exclusion, I think maybe I would think that the services possibly this, and correct me if I'm wrong, exclusion when they're not receiving it at school at all, maybe the private therapies that they're getting. They may be getting speech outside in a clinic and it's not being provided at the school setting. I'm just guessing. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Integration is happening a little bit where they have a group maybe in the back of the room working on certain things, but at least in the classroom. And then we've got pretty close to even on inclusion and segregation. So those SLPs and related service providers are either all in helping the student out or they're pulling them out and separating that. So what we're wanting you guys to do is just think about what's happening now and just thinking about hopefully when we do get back into the building, what can we do to change that to where there's more inclusion than there is the segregation and integration. So I will send it back to you, Sarah.
Hang on one second. For some reason, my screen stopped sharing. Sorry about that.
I'm not sending it back to you. Okay, so this is the backward bicycle video that we want to show. So we didn't embed it because we know of audio issues and things like that, but and unfortunately some of the people that are on the phone may not be able to watch it now, or if you have another device you can. But what in the materials we shared the link, and then also I just shared the YouTube link in the chat box that we would like for you to watch this fun, entertaining video. Enjoy it, and I promise we'll bring it all together once you watch it. We're going to put a timer on there. It's about an 8-minute video. We're going to give you about 10 minutes to watch this, and then we're going to come back and kind of discuss where we're going with this. So go ahead and watch that video, and we'll get back to you in just about 10 minutes.
And you don't have to leave the GoTo training. We're going to go ahead and mute so there's no audio going on right now. So you can just you can go ahead and watch that video, and we will mute ourselves, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes.
All right. It's pretty neat to read the chat. Everyone's, or not everyone, but a lot of people's responses to this video. I love this video. It makes you think about different things and put different things in perspective, absolutely. But one of the reasons why we use this is because sometimes we all get stuck in the old way of riding our bike because it's natural, it feels normal to us. But a lot of times when we talk inclusion and kind of just changing things around, it's learning how to ride that new type of bicycle. And, you know, you might try something for a little bit and it doesn't work, and then you quit and you go right back to the old way of riding your bicycle, or the old way that you're used to doing things and more comfortable way of doing things. But what we're going to talk about today, it may push a little people to think outside the box, to learn how to ride that new kind of bicycle and keep trying. Even though, you know, you may try some things that we talk about today that just blow up and are not good. But instead of giving up, just keep trying. Try it again or try something in another way. But again, we've all been, you know, Sarah and I both have been in the school setting, in the classroom. So we know exactly, you know, when you hear something new, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but how in the world are we going to do it? So what we plan on doing is kind of guiding you toward that, and being able to look at that and say, wait, what are you wanting me to do? The SLPs and related services are a lot of them are comfortable pulling their kids out, working on their IEP goals, and sending them back to class. And it's going to be, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. We need to go back, so yeah, back to that one, wait, what? But what we're going to do, I know on the agenda we talked about how we're going to talk about James Ryan's 5 essential questions. And his book is short, I loved it, but there's 5 questions that he would ask himself through his life. But what we're going to do today is go through these questions and really have an idea of how we're going to be able to provide more inclusive services as SLPs and related service providers, but also as gen ed teachers, special ed teachers, paraprofessionals, the administrators. So I think it's great that we have all these types of school personnel on this video and kind of seeing the same thing and what everyone's hearing. So the first question that he has in his book is, wait, what? So I'm not sure, yeah. So, wait, what? So, like, my wait, what was, you want me to go into the classroom for 2 of my speech kids? Or, you know, wait, what? How am I going to get this scheduled? I don't know, some of you gen ed teachers, what would be your wait, what? Or even everybody on here, if you want to put in a chat, what would be your wait, what are you wanting us to do? Give us some wait, what questions that you guys have right now. Oh, okay. Yep, stand up in front of the students and talk. But yeah, and some of your wait, what would just mean, what are we talking about? What are we going to do? It could be any number of ones, or we may have just hit it on include the entire classroom. Are you kidding me? Now we're getting some. Yep, space, new skills. Yeah, you gotta love those SLP caseloads. I get it. Okay, yeah, these are good. And like I said, we're going to keep these. We may answer some of these during our presentation. If we don't hit on some of these, please, again, feel free to contact us. We don't want this to be a one and done presentation for you guys. This is kind of just an hour and a half of here's what we're thinking, here's what can happen. Definitely we can follow up for the how-to. Hopefully it's in-person how-to, but how-to webinars if that's the way it needs to be. So we'll go on to, so we've got a lot of wait what, and some of you I'm sure have some that you haven't entered, and that's fine. So the question we're saying, wait what? How are we going to do this? What does this mean for my classroom? What does this mean for my caseload? Just what does it look like? So the next question that we're going to go to is, I wonder. So we got the question, it's like, okay, wait, what? We're going to provide inclusive services. Now, I wonder, so this question just kind of makes you sit back, get away from that initial, what am I going to do? So I'm like, okay, I can do this, but I wonder how this is going to happen. I wonder what it's going to look like. I wonder if I'm going to even be able to start. Those are some of my I wonders. Sorry. What about some more I wonders? Yes, Catherine, and I agree with Medicaid billing, but we do have some information on Medicaid billing when providing inclusive services. And that is the big thing, the medical setting versus the school setting. And that's exactly what I talk to a lot of SLPs about, is that medical setting of providing that therapy and sending them back to class. Wonder how you're going to be effective. I know mine was, I wonder how I'm going to get to everyone's goals when everybody has different goals. And the co-teaching, yeah, you worry about the other kids or the kids that are receiving your services, if they're getting it or if other kids are going to make fun. Yep. And hopefully, like I said, we're gonna get to all of these. And you would hope that the whole class can benefit from these, but you're going to wonder, am I just focusing on certain things? I know as an SLP, when I wrote goals, sometimes I would just go off what they answered incorrectly in the standardized test that had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on in the classroom. So when I had goals like that, I wasn't able to work on my IEP goals in the classroom because they didn't connect. And so that was, I know, one of the things that I had to change just professionally. What I was doing is, okay, I've made this student eligible for language or speech services, usually language services. Yes, they had difficulty with these on the standardized test, but what's happening in the general education classroom where this language impairment may be affecting their education? Where can I help? So, you know, that maybe I wonder if I need to change the way I'm writing my goals to be able to go into the classroom a lot easier, to be able to address the students' needs. So we are going to talk about co-teaching models. I know that actually Gail and I were able to go in person to Muncie to talk to some of the, I think it was middle school and high school co-teaching teams, and they were special education teacher and general education teacher. So we're going to go over these different co-teaching models, because you can also co-teach with an SLP or any other licensed teacher. So Sarah is going to cover the different models of co-teaching. Some of you that have gone through the co-teaching training have heard these, but again, some gen ed teachers and SLPs may not have, and it may be something that they would be interested in trying. So I am going to go ahead and send it back to Sarah.
Thank you. Gosh, I think you guys have come up with some really great questions to kind of get started about, started thinking about inclusive practices and what that looks like. And Christy brought up a really good point. You know, when you're talking about, you know, co-teaching, or you're talking about, you know, co-planning, or any of those things that you're doing with another teacher, you know, co-teaching is a really big thing to kind of jump into, and so it's okay and it's acceptable to pick one of those models and really just focus in on them and try it and see what happens. Again, we're going back to that bicycle, and we're trying something that maybe we haven't tried before. We're thinking about something in a different way than what we were thinking about it before. So it's completely acceptable when I'm going through these models. If you see one that really resonates with you and you think, in my current setting right now, I could really use this, hone in on that one and go back when we're done and look at this, look at these slides and think about what this might look like for you as you start to think about next year and what that's going to look like. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on each one of these because there's a lot of information here. I just want you to be kind of familiar with each of the models. And again, if you have specific questions or one of these resonates with you, please reach out to Christy and I, because we're happy to set up a call and talk to you and your team, or talk to whoever you're working with to see what this might look like, one of these models might look like within your classroom. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the first model, and that's One Teach, One Assist. So you can see that there's a little model here in the corner that talks about, that kind of shows you what it looks like. And again, this is typically what you would see in a classroom when maybe we haven't hashed out all of the different co-teaching models. So if we're saying we're doing a full implementation of co-teaching and we're using all the models, a lot of times you'll see this is the one that people default to, because a lot of times what happens is the general education teacher will teach and the special education teacher will assist, or they will go around and help with behaviors or help when kids are straggling or falling behind. But as you'll see, the research and the experts in co-teaching say that this is actually one of the models that you should be using seldom. So there's some challenges that come with this, with sidebar conversations and continuing to kind of set the precedent that there's one assistant and one teacher, when in reality there's two teachers and two instructors that students can go to and that they can get and receive information and instruction from. And making sure too that when we are always going back to this One Teach, One Assist, that we're not giving credit to those other licensed professionals in the room that are there to help and really tapping into their potential for doing it all the time. This is totally appropriate occasionally, but again, this is kind of one that people default to. So we just want to be cognizant of that one. So the next one is One Teach, One Observe. So this is really good. This is a really good one if you're doing the full-blown co-teaching model and you're doing all 6 of these. This is a really good one to tap into when you want to kind of take a step back, and we encourage co-teaching partners to do this all the time, to do this frequently, and to observe what's happening in the classroom when each other are instructing, and then being able to provide feedback to each other and talking about how certain students react to different things within the classroom as each of the co-teaching partners is instructing. And this could be done, again, when we're talking about SLPs and related services, when you're, and if an SLP is coming in and helping to do, is doing a whole class lesson for you, then you can observe some of the strategies and the things that they're using, and you guys can have a discussion about how do we make sure that we integrate these skills that you just taught as a whole class into stations and into further work that we're doing as we're moving forward. The next model of co-teaching is alternative teaching, and again, this kind of looks like each teacher has a group, but typically one of those teachers is focusing on a specific skill that maybe needs to be retaught, or we need to go back and look at this and make sure that a student is getting it. And again, you can see some of those opportunities that come with this particular model, where we can identify pre-existing needs, and we can really hone in on those needs and make sure that we're planning for them. And then also you can do more intensive small groups and have more specific sessions. This doesn't mean that when we're talking about small groups that we're only doing our students that have a label, whether it be EL or special education. that any of these students who are struggling can get this intensive small group. Parallel teaching is just what it sounds like. You have two separate groups and the teachers are covering the same instructional content, typically in the same way, or they're covering the same topic sometimes in two different ways and then switching so that students get that double dose of something. They're hearing it in two different ways. So there's a lot of really great opportunities that come from this particular model, because you're opening up a lot of opportunities for for students to get again, get that content in multiple ways. You're increasing the opportunity for them to be able to respond because they're in a smaller group setting, so it's not quite as intimidating for some of our students who may socially struggle to really step up and voice their voice their answers or their opinions or their thoughts about the content. The next one is teaming, and this one is I think can be a little bit tricky because it's you have to really be in a groove with your co-teaching partner. So if you're teaching with a person all the time and you really have it's kind of become this, we joke around saying that co-teaching partnerships have to be like a marriage, and you have to really be compatible, and your pedagogy and your belief system have to be really in sync, especially to do team teaching, because this would be where you're teaching together at the same time. So it can be really great because it can energize teachers, it can increase student engagement. They're hearing this, two adults get really excited about this content and share their expertise. But again, it does, I think this can be very effective as long as there's a really great partnership there developed, and you and your co-teacher are working really well together. Then this one is station teaching, and I think this is probably the one we're going to really hone in on, because we really feel that this is one that you could take back and it's really applicable to SLPs and related service providers to be able to come in and support in stations, and kind of talking about what that looks like, and that there's a lot of opportunities for observation when students are working independently or in a small group during stations. And then there's also a lot of opportunities for us to create partnerships within our students. So our students can become teachers, our students can assist in groups, and we can make sure that we're putting and partnering students who may be struggling with a certain content with a student who's really excelling, so that that partnership can form, and the student who's teaching can get that extra practice while also helping another student that's struggling. So we are going to really hone in on station teaching today. So Christy and I are going to kind of tag team and talk about some examples of station teaching and what that looks like, and some things that maybe you can think about starting to implement again as we hopefully start to get back to thinking about going back into the brick and mortar building when it's safe. So the first example we have is the SLP and related service providers can come in and do a station with your entire classroom. So thinking about what is a skill that kind of goes with the work that I'm talking about. So vocabulary, articulation. There's several different things that SLPs or related service providers could come in and work with your entire class in a rotation of stations. So they're seeing every student working in these small group stations as they're rotating. And then another thing again for maybe for some of the younger grades, but gross motor during transition. So I was thinking about my son's preschool classroom and how they have gross motor, and their SLP comes in 3 days a week and sees every single student and works with them on a different skill. So they're getting access to that, and I think that one of them, I think one of the important things to remember when we're talking about younger grades, especially, is that not all kids get to go to preschool and get access to those things. So in integrating them into that K3, K4 world is really important when we're talking about the gross motor skills. But then for vocabulary and articulation and some of those fine motor skills with an OT can be integrated K12. And then another example that or option that we talked about was that having an all school or an all grade level intervention time and you guys can let us know in the chat box, do you all have a time that your whole school, your whole grade level is providing intervention, whether that be remediation, whether it be reteach, whether it be enrichment, but you have students going to different places or different teachers to receive support? Can you guys let me know if that's happening anywhere in your district? Okay, I see some yeses, some nos. Okay. So one of the benefits to doing this, for those of you that aren't doing it, is that we can integrate. This is another great way for us to integrate our related service providers. So if our whole grade level is doing this has this time set aside where we're going to be very intentional about giving every kid what they need based on whether they need remediation, reteaching, or enrichment, then we can pull in those SLPs, we can pull in those OTs, we can pull in those special education teachers to really start to provide some of those, again, station work where we're talking about, and when we're talking about enrichment, we're talking about, when we're looking at vocabulary, we can talk about, looking at root words or using a thesaurus and finding synonyms and antonyms to words. So there's lots of different ways to enrich students that even the SLPs and the OTs can participate in. And when there are students with disabilities that are on their caseload are in those groups, then those count as minutes towards their, towards what they need to fulfill their IEP. So again, Christy, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that with related services, but those are some examples that I think you guys can start mulling over and taking back with you.
Yeah, I think with station teaching, it's definitely the younger elementary if they have stations. But, there's going to be different ideas that we have for the secondary grade level, since it looked like in your elementaries you had that time. You may not have it in middle school and high school. But definitely the stations, I would say, would be the most beneficial. We talked about, if there is a student on the speech caseload and you're doing stations, they may stay in your station for 2 rotations. And I'm not sure Sarah had stated that. But also, vocabulary and language is easier to do. When you're talking speech articulation, I think what we're used to as SLPs is just drilling and working on those sounds, but something that has come up in some of the other webinars that I have attended just professionally is just talking about how you could work on articulation during decoding and rhyming words and those younger skills that need to be developed, that, if the student has difficulty with the specific sound, then maybe you could work on it in the final position, but also working on rhyming. Or, if they have difficulty with blending while they're reading, put some, depending on the level they are, with their articulation or their speech skill, putting those speech sounds in those decoding. And, you could do that with the whole group, because I'm sure there's some kids that have difficulty decoding that don't have articulation errors. So if you do have a whole stack or whatever of words that have the K or G sound in them, it's still going to benefit those other students to be able to work on the blending of the words. So like I said, it's just kind of thinking how you can change what you're already doing to incorporate more students in maybe in a different way.
So this next slide has just some visual examples. I'm definitely a visual learner. I need to see things to be able to really process and understand them. So this is just some examples of what, if you're talking about station teaching, whether it be, in elementary or in secondary, you can see that it doesn't always require you to have more than one teacher, but you can have opportunities where you can add some of those stations when those SLP and related service providers are available to be able to push in during your station time, adding in something else to that rotation. But just looking again at, having a station with a learning station where we're either reteaching or we may be remediating with a certain group of students, but that they can do small group work, they can do independent work, they can collaborate as a whole group and talk about, a project that they're working on or a unit of study that that you're in right now, having something that they can really collaborate around. And again, I think this is this other graphic is a really good example, gives a really good example versus non-examples of what station teaching looks like and some of the advantages to that particular model. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Christy to talk about the next question.
So we've got wait what? We've got I wonder. Now we're looking at could we at least? So this is really where you're going to start thinking about where could I begin? We're not saying your whole speech caseload is going to be inclusive services. You know, that would be way difficult on everyone. But where could you at least? And some of the things that we have on here is, could I at least maybe talk to one teacher and see if I can go in during stations with them? You know, think about your related arts or your elective classrooms if you're at the secondary level. And I don't know about you, but I know at the school I was at, that's where, you know, if someone had a para, when the classroom went to related arts or elective classroom, that's a lot of times where the para doesn't go with them. So, you know, I would get tons of questions from the art teacher, you know, from the music teacher to say, oh my gosh, how can I engage these students in with that? So definitely talk to your related arts teachers, and I'm sorry, I don't know what you call them there, but we call them related arts teachers where I was, or your elective classrooms at the secondary level, and just kind of see, you know, talk with them, tell them what you're thinking about doing, and just see if they wouldn't be willing to be able to try at least, you know, one class or one group or something. Also recess, as far as PT, I think a lot of PTs already do this, is, you know, work on the gross motor out on the playground or during recess. If you're working on fine motor skills or even social skills during lunch, I know I had some lunch groups that actually, like I said, when I was doing it the way that I was taught to do it, I'd pull them into my class and we'd have lunch, you know, by ourselves with everyone that has difficulties with social communication. It's like, man, why didn't I go into the lunchroom and just sit down where those students were and kind of help them have social conversations with multiple people? So, oh, and I see, Michelle, that you do say the students do really well in special areas, and that is the case a lot of the time. I'm not saying it's wrong not to send paras, but I know they may be willing to have like an SLP or OT or somebody come in and work with them too. So no, I don't want you to think that, you know, that's when our kids struggle, but just giving you ideas on, you know, different places that we really don't think about sometimes. You know, the English language arts, the math and primary and secondary. I know, and this kind of goes along with the scheduling, that when we have the pull-out program and we've got to stay away from the 90-minute reading block, and we've got to stay away from math, and then it ends up being, you know, science and social studies that we push in sometimes, or we, you know, that's when we do the pull-out services. But you know what? If you could provide inclusive services in the classroom, you could go into those classrooms during reading block. You could go in those classrooms during math time. That would open up your schedule a lot, because you won't have those times blocked off. So especially, you know, like I said, in the secondary too, you know, is we're using the word co-teaching in a lot of, you know, with co-teaching, you've got co-teaching, co-planning, co-assessing, and it's this huge undertaking of things. What we want you guys to think about is just the co-teaching models to use. So it may not be co-teaching per se, but using those different types of models to be able to go into the classroom, or for your teachers to have someone come in. So it wouldn't necessarily, you know, have to be a licensed teacher to be able to do a station. Like we just had a question about paras. You know, if you're not teaching anything new, then yes, you know, as far as legally you are able to. Now, if your district has a different policy with that, that's definitely what you have to follow, is your school's policy. But, you know, if there's no new teaching going on, and new content. If the pair is just kind of going over things and providing support, they could definitely have a station. So it would open that up too. And again, we're talking about scheduling. And scheduling, we had the question earlier about, you're having to group them, and you might. I had a building where it was just 5th and 6th graders, and it took me a while to get this to happen, but I talked to them, and they had teams, and I don't know how large your grade levels are, but they taught in teams. So they were able to provide a lot of my kids with speech and language on the same, at least 2 or 3 teams, and kind of spreading them out with the teachers, but just not all over the building like they would if I hadn't requested that some of them be together. So definitely talking with counselors during scheduling, talking to your administrators, classroom teachers talking with each other. We don't want to group all the kids with special needs in a classroom, because then it just defeats the purpose of inclusion, but really working on with your principal or assistant principal or whoever does that scheduling and saying, okay, I know these kids are coming in and they have these types of issues. Can we at least put them on the same team or, the same schedule? So, it's that whole communication piece, which we're also going to talk about in a little bit, but, the speech and related service would just kind of sit back, wait until the schedule comes out, find out where all their kids are, and then trying to create a schedule. And it's going to be a change in maybe talking about scheduling right from the very beginning and being a part of it, or at least be at the table, during the discussion of where students are going to be placed and in what classrooms. And I think SLPs have a lot of information that they can share during those discussions of, where students should be. So that's your could we at least or could I at least. Does anybody have any could I at least try something that you want to put in the chat box? We're not going to hold you to it. It's like, could you at least maybe think about doing this next year? And it may be something that you're thinking about that someone else hasn't, but once they read your response, they're like, hey, maybe I could do that too. So that's the only reason we're asking you guys to put these things in the chat, just to give each other ideas. I know during this time when, we're just meeting every so often and we don't have that time together, it's kind of nice just to be able to use this time to say, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or I was thinking about doing this. And it kind of gets that conversation going. So feel free to put your could I at least idea in the chat box to share. So that's all I have for the could I at least. And here's where we talk about the communication. How can I help is that fourth question, as far as how can I help do this? And anything that you're going to try, anything that you're going to make changes in, it's that whole communication piece. And I love this sign because a lot of times we're like, oh, here you go, good luck finding your own way. And again, going back to the fact that we don't want this just to be a one and done presentation, that if you guys have questions, if you want extra information, please reach out to us. But as far as, communication, that's communication with your administrator, that's communication with your teachers, with your students. And I'm, just telling you a little story about what happened with me when I was doing this. And I was trying to make changes. It was when it was like I knew I needed to do something else, and I just didn't know how to communicate it. And I always say now, if I would have known then what I know now, man, I could be doing some great things when just doing them halfway when I was there. But what happened was I'd go into a classroom and I see that there was an opportunity for me. I was going to the classroom to pull the student out for speech and language services. But they were doing an activity that I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be great for me just to stay in and work with the student here and work with answering questions and, you know, all sorts of different things. And I stayed in that class for, it was probably 40 minutes. Excuse me. And I get ready to leave and the teacher looks at me and says, so when are you going to take them for their speech time? So of course, being the most professional person I am, you know, what I do is I go back and I call my fellow SLPs and I'm like, can you believe this person said this when I was in there for 40 minutes? But you know, now that I look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, that was my fault. I didn't communicate to that teacher what I was doing. I think they may have thought I was just in there to see what was going on and how they were doing and not really knowing that I was actually providing those services in her classroom at that time. Sorry, I'm on my second bottle of water, so I apologize. So anyway, different possible ways of communicating. Oh, and Brenda says that they can push into the kids' homes next year. Okay, just let me know how that goes. And I'm sure there's some parents that would probably love for that to happen right now, actually. So just giving the parents ideas of what to do or just having someone come in and work with their students. So but just different possible ways to communicate. We've got a list here. Some places have morning meetings. Some places have face-to-face meetings. You have your grade level meetings that you talk about things. You have notebooks that maybe are provided to you for communication logs, email, Google Docs, grade level or student meetings. But those are great if you've got time to do that. If you're tech savvy and even know how to do the Google Docs. Most people like face-to-face. So we did create another poll for you. And this is to talk about what's your personal preference to communicate with SLPs and related service providers. So we've got how you teachers communicate with one another, but how do you communicate with SLPs and vice versa? How do SLPs communicate to teachers? And this is your preference. It may not be how you do it, but it may be what you would rather have. And if you have chosen other, if you could just put some ideas in the chat box, that would be great just to find out how the other ways you prefer to communicate. Okay, so there is a variety of ways, email and face-to-face. So that's good. And these results are pretty much how I prefer to communicate. So I will go ahead and close that and share it. So yes, obviously face-to-face meetings would be the most beneficial. What we worry about sometimes with face-to-face meetings is a lot of times it's just a complaining type session and what's going wrong. But you just need to make sure your face-to-face meetings have an agenda that yes, you have that venting time, but then also you're going to discuss what needs to happen with those students. And you're right, it depends on who you're talking with. You may rather talk face-to-face with one teacher and email another one. It all depends on your preference, but definitely needs to happen as far as the communication piece for you to make the best things possible. So one of the things with communication too and providing inclusive services is the progress monitoring of your IEP goals. And I kind of hit that a little bit earlier on is, you know, if your goals are written to support the gen ed teacher and the gen ed, not gen ed teacher, but in the general education setting, your progress monitoring is going to be a lot easier to do, and your communication regarding the progress monitoring of the goals may be easier. You know, when the teacher knows what that SLP has been working on, they're going to be able to put a lot of more information in that IEP section of present levels and progress monitoring than just the SLP who sees the student in a pull-out setting, and they're pretty much the only one that is progress monitoring. But, you know, you go into the classroom and the teacher's more aware of the goals. They're more aware of the strategies that the professionals are using to work on those goals, and they're going to end up carrying those strategies over, which may end up helping a lot more students than just those students receiving those special education. So that communication, you know, I never can say how strong communication is because it is paramount to successful programs as far as inclusion, as far as anything, and most benefiting the student is communicating with one another so everybody knows what's going on. Another thing too, the communication with the parents. So if those parents are used to you guys pulling those students out of the class, and then all of a sudden they hear that they haven't been pulled out. We had this happen one time where an SLP got a phone call from an angry parent because the student came home and said they hadn't been receiving speech. Well, the SLP had changed their services to inclusive services, so the child wasn't being pulled out of the classroom for speech anymore. He was getting the services in the classroom, and he obviously didn't realize it. So as far as that communication with your students and the parents, that's what's going to be instrumental also in keeping those communication lines open. So Sarah, do you have anything else to add in communication?
No, I think you've done a really great job covering that. I was going to add the parent aspect, but you've pretty much covered that. I think the last thing we really want to bring it back to is what truly matters and why we're talking about this and why why you're on this webinar, and that's because what it boils down to is that the students sitting in our classrooms and coming into our doors are why we're why we're here, why we're talking about this, why we're brainstorming ideas and ways to, to make inclusive practices work. So always keeping in mind that, all of the things that we've talked about today, by no means are we saying that this is the only way that every student should receive services or should be supported. But what we're saying is that when we think about what are some of the things that we can do, to some of those small things that we can do to adjust what we're already doing and kind of change our aim and thinking about things a little bit differently to, again, in the end, come back to what truly matters, and that's making a more, more inclusive environment for all of our students and making sure that all of their uniqueness and their diversity is, is represented and honored in all of our classrooms. So we are trying to be very cognizant of your time. So we have about 10 minutes left with you. So we want to open it up to make sure that there are not any other questions that we haven't answered yet. So we'll give you a second to throw those into the chat box. Is there anything that that you came in today hoping that you were going to get something out of, or that when we started you were hoping to have answers to this question? So go ahead and let us know what those questions are, if there are any, and then we'll talk about the evaluation and how to get a copy of that chat conversation.
And if there is something that you do have a question on and you just don't want everybody to know that you're asking the question, which again would help others because they may have the same question, but I completely understand not wanting to share it. You can just send it to us in an email. You can just chat with us personally with one of us. So we just want to make sure, again, that you guys leave here going, okay, we can use some of this. We're not sure where to start, but it sounds great. Please let us know, and we can definitely set something up to where we can have those conversations with you to help improve the practices and the inclusion services, which on that one poll, it sounds like you guys have great inclusive services already, but, let's just talk about those ones that may be able to receive their services in the classroom, but you're just not quite sure how. So, yes, Tamara, the PowerPoint is included in the materials section. So if you click on materials, that's another thing. We have two additional handouts in the materials section of just information on the benefits of inclusive services. So those two handouts we didn't talk about. They're just for your, you only. So yes, you have the PowerPoint in there, and then those two handouts, but as well as the link to the backward bicycle video. If you are leaving, go ahead and make sure you fill out that evaluation for us. We honestly do use those. Actually, we got some information on the previous webinars that you guys have done and your feedback, and we tried to make, we read through those and we tried to make changes to ours as we needed. So we definitely use those if you guys could fill out those evaluations. You will get a certificate for attendance. Those should be sent out within the next week or so. Give us some time. And for Mark, you're in there as Mark. So we will definitely make sure it says Mark Scott for the certificate. I will definitely let Gail know that. But thanks again for everyone attending. We'll stay on here for a while in case you do think of a question, but please feel free to go ahead and complete those evaluations and have a great rest of the school year.